Well, I was sitting at 3:30 this morning writing out the February forecast. I told you it was going to go right to the wire, and indeed it did. But it is now available on markloganweather.com, so if you haven't visited it already, Google it and have a read at the latest content I've produced. Thanks for clicking on to the Wednesday, the 1st of February edition of Vogan's European Outlook. The February Outlook is out and available to all. I also have skill scored the December and January period, and you can make your own. You can draw your own conclusion as to how you think my forecast has played out versus the reality of what we've seen during the month of December and indeed January. I have given a 9 out of 10 actually for the month of December based on the level of cold, the timing of the warm up week running up to Christmas that has kind of held on through the new year, with the exceptions of Northern Scotland. And I gave January 7.5 out of 10, a little bit less, despite the fact that I believe I did, generally speaking, get it pretty decent in terms of the milder first half, the colder second half. But Europe, there was aspects about the mainland of Europe that kind of let me down, actually, I think. So a little bit less of a score on the January period here. But it's all to play for in the 2023 February Outlook. Complicating factors. There is a lot of things going on, competing aspects, and I think we have got a very interesting month coming up. Up until now, the stratospheric polar vortex, I don't believe, has played a role, and that is quite impressive. The cold outbreaks that we have seen thus far this winter, given no involvement of the stratospheric polar vortex influence, I think has been quite impressive actually. But like I say, have a look at it anyway. Forecast versus reality. I have extracts of the actual what was written in the forecast versus what I believe took place in reality for both December and indeed January. So have a look through that. There's a lot of work being put into that. And then, of course, I go on at the bottom to talk in quite a bit of detail regarding the month of February here. So let's get right into it. I think we've got a very interesting month coming up, that's for sure. But before I get there, actually, I want to talk about this because I think it's quite interesting that when you combine the overall 60-day temperature normally here, yeah, it's been a warm winter so far in Europe, but actually it's been average to below average for the UK, below average for Ireland and Northern Ireland, as you can see here, very cold compared to normal across Iceland. So that's near enough encompassing the first 2 months of the year, give or take a few days. The winter anyway. So all in all, despite the spells of mild, it has actually been leaning on the cold side of average for December and January, and it will be interesting to see what's produced in the month of February here overall. So so let's get right to it here. Do talk about in like I say in a bit of detail with regards to what I think is going to take place during week 1 of February here. What we've got the core of coldest air anywhere in the northern hemisphere over Canada at the moment, and within this vortex of low pressure is actually a piece of the tropospheric polar vortex. All the models are now suggesting that rotates south in through the northeastern half of the United States and pushes out over the North Atlantic. That in turn is going to boost the high over our side of the Atlantic here. So in essence, what happens here, now this is off the GFS ensemble, not an operational here, so there's a little bit more guidance with this as opposed to just an ordinary operational run, which is run off obviously several times a day. But keep your eyes closely fixed. So this area of high pressure is helping force the southward discharge of this polar vortex within the troposphere. southwards. And as you notice here, if we pay close attention to the southward push of this lobe of bitterly cold polar air, what that's essentially doing is it's forcing this trough ahead of it to the east to pump the area of high pressure over the British Isles and Ireland here. So as we progress into the weekend, we are going to see the area of high pressure building. And remember, I showed you a few days ago the strength of the high, rises into the 1040s and millibars. That is the reason why it's the southward displacement of this trough, this cold pocket over North America, then pumps the high on our side of the Atlantic. But the question mark is, does that high get pushed into Europe? If it does, we're in the west to southwesterly flow in the means. But the modelling suggests anyway that as the core of this vortex rotates out into the North Atlantic, we're actually going to force that area of high pressure up into Scandinavia. In turn, we're then going to force the heights to lower over Europe, and then it's all eyes on what this area of high pressure does. Does it then turn the winds in from an easterly direction over Europe? That then opens the question, anything coming in off the Atlantic, does it get stopped from anything coming east? So these are the key aspects that I'm looking at with regards to the end of week 1, beginning of week 2 of February here. So let's go back to the current period. This is the setup. Area of high pressure originally, and it still is the case actually, it's been stronger than average, keeping the majority of the UK on the warm side of the jet stream. Systems riding over the top of that area of high pressure, making for quite a wet spell here for northern Scotland, especially northwest. We had windy conditions, of course, overnight as that area of low pressure dropped from Iceland close to the UK, and then it's now slid east. Now, as we play through this loop here, so this is the same GFS ensemble run, looking at Europe. This is the 500 millibar height anomaly chart here. That area of high pressure, of course, keeping most of the weather systems at bay. But if you go back, you see here that we've got straight westerly flow, then a northwesterly flow as the high becomes centered a little bit further west. So we're in that cooler northwesterly flow. But then as we progress through the second half of this week, with influences going on over eastern North America, the area of high pressure over the UK starts to become stronger and stronger and stronger. But it's as we go through the weekend, with the core centered almost over the British Isles, that we then see an even stronger ridge at 500 millibars building over the UK. Like I said, because that piece of the vortex, that deep trough, that negative over eastern North America, slides out over the eastern portion or the western portion of the Atlantic, then pumps the high. Now we're then forcing the jet stream to become a lot more amplified, southward plunge, northwards over the British Isles at the moment. But then as we progress into early portions of next week, so this is the end of week 1 of February, you start to notice we've got negatives now showing up over the southern half of Europe. There's that area of high pressure seen by the GFS ensemble lifting up towards Scandinavia. But of course, there is still a long way out, and this area of high pressure, all it needs to do is push east rather than north, and therefore we don't see this kind of setup. That even if we do get an area of high pressure that builds north over Scandinavia, that does not necessarily guarantee that we're going to start to see a beast from east developing here. And I have to emphasize that point. But certainly it is interesting nonetheless to see what's going on here. That certainly would be a very interesting look indeed, with the ridge over the trough type setup here. And if you look at the 2-meter temperature anomalies for the exact same time frame, there is Europe. Isn't that very interesting indeed? But we'll just watch this space. Let's have a look at the ECMWF, and see what the model is showing here. So this is the exact same scenario here, 500 millibar geopotential height anomaly chart. This is off weathercharts.com. And as you notice here, that as we play through the period, we start to see the deepening of the trough over the Atlantic here in response to that core of coldest air anywhere in the northern hemisphere, uh, plunging into the northeastern half of the United States. Now, that southeastern ridge over the United States is going to stop that from rotating all the way south. That can still have an impact as well, remember. But notice here, like the GFS ensemble, it's pumping the high over the UK and over Western Europe, trough over eastern portions of Europe. But notice a slight difference. The ECMWF does not see that high building north up into Scandinavia. We've got a deep trough here, a deep negative off the coast of Scandinavia. That, in a sense, is helping keep the high further south and further east, and therefore, very different scenario altogether. We don't have an easterly wind developing underneath the high, and we've got more westerly influence off the Atlantic here. So it's all to play for the month of February. My overall consensus is mild start, colder second half. We'll have to factor in the Marangelan oscillation, which isn't getting talked about in today's video. We'll have to factor in what's going on within the stratosphere. There's another stratospheric warming potential during the middle portion of the month. I actually think winter could be slow to exit this year as we progress into the springtime. So, in other words, I think the second half of February is going to be a fairly cold period, and also I think March, possibly even April, could have lingering cold and even snow. So, there you go. I have said it. A slow start to spring is possible given the overall situation as it unfolds. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Do check out marvelandweather.com and see the write up for what happened in December, January versus the forecast, plus what I think is going to take place during the month of February. And as always, do appreciate you watching, dropping a comment. Please like, please share, and if you haven't already done so, hit that subscribe button as well for more. Stay tuned. See you again, hopefully tomorrow with more. Bye for now.